When I stepped into the courtroom that morning, my daughter Emily rolled her eyes and leaned toward her husband, Brian, whispering something dismissive. But then something I never expected happened. "If you're listening, make sure to follow along and tell me where you're from." The judge froze mid-movement, looked straight at me and muttered in disbelief, "It's her." The whole room went silent. Nobody there had the slightest clue who I really was until that moment, and that trial turned my life upside down. My name's Linda, I'm 69, and until just a few months ago, I was nothing more than a regular grandma living an ordinary life. Every morning I'd get up at 6, pour coffee into the same chipped mug I'd been using for 20 years, and water the African violets my late husband adored, all while gazing out the tiny kitchen window. It was a simple life, steady and predictable, filled with small routines that gave me peace. For 45 years I gave everything to raise my only daughter, Emily. I worked nights scrubbing office floors, baked cupcakes on weekends to sell, and sewed clothes whenever I could, all so she could go to college and have the kind of future I never had. When she married Brian, a man too arrogant to ever say one kind word to me, I bit my tongue and still welcomed them every Sunday with a full table and my best smile. After my husband passed, I honestly believed Emily and I would grow closer. How foolish that hope was. Instead of finding comfort in me, my daughter started to see me as a burden. Her visits turned stiff, her phone calls became rare, and her excuses grew more and more creative. My lowest moment came one gray Thursday in October. I had spent hours making her favorite chicken and dumplings, the kind that always lit up her face when she was a little girl. I spread out my nicest embroidered tablecloth, the one I had stitched when she was a teenager, and even splurged on fresh flowers for the centerpiece. When they arrived, Brian strolled in like he owned the place, dropped into my late husband's armchair, and turned on the TV without even a hello. Emily wore the green dress I had bought for her, but her face was colder than January ice. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in that strange clipped voice she'd picked up after marriage, like she wasn't even my daughter anymore. She perched on the edge of the chair ready to leave. "Brian and I have decided this house is too big for you. You can't manage it alone. We need more space for when we start a family. We already found a retirement community that's perfect for you." I felt the ground crack open beneath me. This was the house where Emily had taken her first steps, where we blew out candles on every birthday cake, where her father passed away holding my hand. Every corner breathed our memories. Every photo on the wall carried our story. "But Emily, this is our home. Everything we are is in these walls," I begged, my voice breaking apart. "Memories live in the heart, Mom, not in a building," she answered, cold enough to chill my bones. "Besides, the community has activities for people your age. You'll actually be happier there with folks like you." Brian's smirk spread as his eyes swept across the room, already sizing up what he thought was his. "It's for the best, Mrs. Linda," he added with that fake smile I despised. "We'll handle the paperwork. You don't need to worry." My heart splintered. The daughter I'd poured my life into was tossing me aside, handing my home to that smug man. Tears burned, but I swallowed them down. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "I need some time to think," I whispered, clinging to what little dignity I had left. "There's nothing to think about, Mom," Emily replied as she stood. "The appraiser's coming next week." Then they left, abandoning my chicken and dumplings untouched, my flowers already wilting, and my heart shattered at the same table where we'd once laughed as a family. That night I sat awake in the kitchen staring at the photos on the wall. Emily as a baby. Emily's first day of school. Emily in her cap and gown. In every picture I was there, holding her, hugging her, glowing with pride. How had it come to this? How could the little girl who once called me her hero now treat me like I was nothing? The days that followed were a nightmare. Brian brought a real estate appraiser without warning. A man in a gray suit who marched through my home as if it were already on the market. He scribbled notes, measured the rooms, and rattled off all the problems, as if I didn't even exist. Emily trailed behind him, nodding along to every insult. "These pipes are outdated," the appraiser said. "And this tile? Way too old. Everything would have to go." But those tiles weren't just tile. My husband had laid them himself when Emily was 10. Each piece held sweat, hope, and love. To them, though, it was nothing but junk. The final insult came when Emily handed me glossy brochures for the retirement community. "Look, Mom, there are beautiful gardens and bingo nights on Tuesdays," she chirped in that phony voice she used whenever she tried to sell me on something. And they've got a nurse on duty 24/7. You'll be safer. Safer? I had lived in this house for 3 decades without a single issue. I knew every neighbor, every creak in the floor, every flower bed. But to Emily none of that mattered. She only wanted me gone. Then one afternoon they arrived with papers. Brian strutted in first, Emily right behind him, and a lawyer I'd never met introduced himself. Mrs. Linda, all we need now is your signature to transfer the property. Transfer? I asked confused. I thought you planned to sell the house. Emily avoided my eyes. Well, Brian and I decided to keep it. It's smarter for the family to hold on to property. That's when it hit me. They didn't just want me out. They wanted to steal my home, the one my husband and I had built with our bare hands. This wasn't care, it was theft, dressed up as concern. I'm not signing anything, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Brian shot up, his whole demeanor shifting, his mask gone. Ma'am, you're no longer in the right state to make decisions. Emily's your only heir and she's doing what's best for you. This is my house, I shouted, surprising even myself. And I'm not leaving. Mom, please don't make this harder, Emily whispered, suddenly uneasy. You can't keep living here alone. Remember last week you left the gas stove on? It was a lie. I had never left the gas running. But Brian smiled like he had just found the perfect excuse. Come on, Emily, Brian said, his voice dripping with false concern. Your mom isn't well. It's dangerous to leave her alone. The lawyer cleared his throat and added, Ma'am, if you won't sign willingly, we may have to pursue other legal options. A mental incompetency hearing, for instance. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. My own daughter was willing to have me declared incapable just so she could take my home. The man I'd once tried to treat like a son-in-law was standing in my living room, threatening me. And I, a 69-year-old woman, was completely alone against them. I need time, I muttered, beaten down. You've got 1 week, Brian said coldly. Then we'll do what we have to do. When they walked out, I collapsed into my late husband's chair and sobbed harder than I had since his funeral. I cried for the daughter I'd lost, for the home slipping away from me, and for the life that was crumbling into dust. I felt betrayed, humiliated, utterly powerless. That night, for the first time ever, I thought about giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too weak, too useless to fight. Maybe it would be easier to just let go, fade quietly the way they wanted. But then deep inside something stubborn sparked. A flame of dignity still burning. I wasn't going to let them crush me without a fight. Not after all I'd sacrificed. The next day, Emily showed up alone. My heart leapt with a fragile hope. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she wanted forgiveness. How wrong I was. Mom, I came to help you pack, she said flatly. I brought boxes. We can start with your clothes. I stared at her, searching for the girl I had raised, but all I saw was a stranger, cold, calculating. Emily, please, I begged. I'm your mother. That's exactly why I'm doing this, she said, eyes averted. Because I love you. I want what's best for you. But was this what love looked like? Stripping me of my home, my dignity, every piece of who I was. For hours she packed my things as if they were junk. She shoved family photos into boxes without care, stuffed away the books my husband had given me, the china from our wedding, the embroidered linens I had worked on through sleepless nights. Holding up my black mourning dress, the one I wore to her father's funeral, she said, "This is so old, Mom. You don't need it. Please leave it," I begged. But she dropped it into a donation bag anyway. My pain didn't matter. My memories didn't matter. I didn't matter. The breaking point came when she found my jewelry box. Inside were treasures I had guarded my whole life. My wedding ring, the earrings my husband gave me for our 20th anniversary, a gold chain that had belonged to my mother. "This jewelry will be safer in a deposit box," Emily said, slipping it into her purse. "That's mine." I cried, reaching for it. "Mom, you're getting upset. This only proves you can't care for yourself," she replied, her calm voice slicing colder than ice. In that moment I knew. The daughter I loved was gone. Emily was dead to me, replaced by someone greedy and heartless, blinded by Brian's manipulation. That night when she left, taking my jewelry and my memories, my house felt like an empty shell. The bare walls mocked me with how little was left. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor surrounded by boxes and broken pieces of my life, asking myself when I had stopped mattering. The next few days were pure torment. Brian barged in every morning to oversee the packing as if I weren't capable of folding my own clothes. He brought strangers, men with cameras and clipboards, who measured every corner, snapped photos, and spoke about my home like it was a lifeless object. They acted like I was invisible, like I was just another old piece of furniture in their way. "The lady needs to speed this up," Brian muttered to Emily. "The movers are coming Monday." It was Friday. 3 days left in the only home I'd known for 30 years. The house where I'd raised my daughter, the place where I'd loved and been loved. "What if I don't finish packing?" I whispered. "Don't worry, Mom," Emily said without even glancing up from her phone. "The movers will take care of it. Just grab what's essential." As if my entire life could be boiled down to a box or two. That afternoon when they left, I wandered through my house like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted. I sat in the chairs where we had shared breakfasts. I opened drawers full of forgotten treasures. And then, in his old desk, I stumbled across a folder with his initials, locked tight. My heart raced. I hunted for the key in all the usual places until finally, inside an old book on investments, I found it. When I unlocked the folder, everything changed. Inside were documents I barely understood. But one paper froze me in my tracks. A will dated just 6 months before his death. My husband had been far more foresight than I'd ever imagined. Emily, my poor foolish Emily, had no idea what was about to hit her. With trembling hands I read. My husband had quietly built a fortune over the years. He'd invested in small properties when prices were low, bought company stocks that had exploded in value, and saved every extra dime. He wasn't just the modest man I'd thought he was. He had created wealth beyond my wildest dreams. But the most shocking part was this. I was the sole heir. Everything was left to me. Emily would only inherit a token sum, but only if she cared for me with genuine love and respect in my final years. My husband had seen what I refused to admit. He had seen through Brian. And then came the clause that stole my breath. The building where Emily and Brian lived? My husband owned the whole thing. Their apartment, the one they thought they were paying for, was actually ours. Every tenant's rent had been flowing into an account I never knew existed. I flipped through the bank statements, my hands shaking. The balance was staggering, so large it made me dizzy. For 2 years after my husband's death, I had been living like a poor widow, all while a fortune was quietly piling up in the bank. But the surprises didn't stop there. I discovered that my husband owned shares in the very company where Brian worked. Not just a handful, but enough to actually influence decisions. There were also investments in restaurants, small businesses, and even a huge piece of land on the edge of the city that had skyrocketed in value. I read every page, every contract, every certificate over and over. Everything was legitimate, carefully organized. My husband had built a quiet empire, and somehow, without knowing it, I was now sitting on the throne. But what shook me most wasn't the money. It was a letter tucked at the end of the folder. It was in his handwriting, addressed to me. "My dearest Linda," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've found what I kept for you. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive. I wanted this to be a surprise for your golden years. You worked so hard, sacrificed so much for Emily and me. I wanted to make sure you'd never want for anything." Tears streamed down my face as I read on. I must also confess something. I never trusted Brian. There's an ambition in him that unsettles me. That's why I arranged everything this way. If Emily treats you with love and respect, she'll have her share of comfort. But if she mistreats you or tries to take advantage of you, you'll have all the power to protect yourself. Use this wisely, my love. Not to harm, but to shield yourself and to teach. Deep down, Emily is a good person. She's just lost her way. But if you need to defend yourself, you now have the tools. It was signed, "Your husband who loves you for all eternity." I sat on the floor surrounded by papers worth millions, sobbing for the wise man I had lost and for the daughter I was losing. But this time my tears weren't of defeat. They carried gratitude, hope, and yes, even a quiet satisfaction. Emily and Brian thought they were stripping me of everything. They had no clue I owned the very building they lived in, or that I held shares in Brian's company, or that there were properties scattered all over town. To them, my house was the prize. They didn't realize it was the least valuable thing I owned. That night I didn't sleep, Not out of despair but because my mind was racing. My husband hadn't just left me money. He had left me power. And now I needed to decide how to use it. On Monday morning, rain tapped softly against the windows as Emily and Brian arrived with movers, expecting to find me packed and ready to go. Instead, I sat calmly in my favorite chair, sipping tea like it was any other day. "Mom, what are you doing?" "The movers are here," Emily snapped, her voice sharp with impatience. "I'm not leaving," I said, steady and calm, even surprising myself. Brian stepped forward with that menacing smirk I knew too well. "Mrs. Linda, we've already talked about this. You don't have a choice." For the first time in years, I met his gaze without fear. "You're right, Brian. I don't have a choice. But neither do you." Something in my voice must have unnerved them, because Emily's expression shifted to unease. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've just learned some very interesting things about my finances," I said, sipping my tea. "But don't worry, you'll understand soon enough." They looked at me the way you look at someone rambling nonsense. But I wasn't the broken woman they thought I was. I had a plan. And, more importantly, the power to carry it out. "Mom, enough with this," Emily said irritably. "The movers are waiting. They have other jobs." "Then they can leave," I answered calmly. "Because nothing's being moved out of this house." Brian jumped up, his face darkening. "Ma'am, I don't think you grasp the situation. You don't have a choice here." "On the contrary, Brian," I said, rising from my chair and walking to the desk where I had placed a few carefully chosen papers. "It's you who doesn't understand." I held up a deed. "Did you know that your apartment, the one you've been living in for 3 years, has never been paid to the real owner?" Emily frowned. "What are you talking about?" "We pay rent every month." "Yes," I said. "You pay a management company who then transfers it to me because I own the entire building." The silence was so heavy I could hear the rain against the window. Brian was the first to speak, letting out a shaky laugh. "That's impossible. You live off a measly pension." "I lived on that pension because I chose to," I said, savoring their confusion. "My husband was far smarter than any of us imagined." I handed the deed to Emily. She read it once, twice, 3 times, her hands trembling. This can't be real," she whispered. "It's as real as the fact that you tried to throw me out of my home," I said. "And this house, by the way, is the least valuable thing I own." Brian snatched the paper from her hands, his face turning pale as he read. "This is a fake. It has to be. Verify it any time you want," I replied with a calm smile I hadn't felt in months. "In fact, I encourage you to." Emily collapsed onto the sofa, her legs giving way. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because I didn't know until 3 days ago," I said softly. "Your father kept it hidden to protect me. He was a visionary." Brian began pacing in circles, clearly rattled. "This changes everything, Emily. If she really owns the building, she can evict us whenever she wants. Along with all the other tenants who've been paying me faithfully for the past 2 years," I added. "You can't do this, Mom," Emily's voice cracked. "We're family." Family. The word tasted bitter. Like when you plotted to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my home. Like when you packed away my life like garbage. Like when you took my mother's jewelry. Emily broke down in tears, but not the fake ones she had mastered. These were real. Tears of fear. "Mom, please. We can fix this. It was all Brian's idea." "Emily!" Brian shouted, furious that she was turning on him. "It's true," Emily whispered, ignoring Brian's outburst. "He convinced me it was best for you. He said your memory was slipping, that you couldn't care for yourself." "And you believed him?" I asked, my heart breaking all over again. "Do you know your own mother so little, that you trusted him over your instincts?" The movers, who had been waiting by the doorway, finally stepped closer. "Excuse me," one of them said, "are we moving this stuff or not? We've got another job in an hour." "No," I said firmly. "Nothing is leaving this house. You can go." Brian's mask cracked. He stormed toward me, anger flashing in his eyes. "This isn't over, old lady. We'll challenge those documents. We'll prove they're fake." "Go right ahead," I said calmly. "And while you're busy with that, I hope you've got savings, because on the 1st of next month, you'll be getting an eviction notice." "You can't do this to us," Brian shouted, completely losing control. "I can," I said, steady as stone, "and I will." But don't worry, I'll be fair. I'll give you the 30 days the law requires. Emily shot up from the couch, her face pale. Mom, please. You have to understand. Brian told me if I didn't convince you to move, he'd leave me. He said he couldn't live with the guilt of you being alone in danger. And that justifies everything? I asked. Treating me like garbage, packing my memories like trash, stealing your grandmother's jewelry? I'll give it back right now, Emily sobbed, digging through her purse. It's too late for that, I said, my voice heavy. Brian tried again, but his tone had shifted. He wasn't threatening anymore, he was pleading. Mrs. Linda, maybe we can work something out. Emily's pregnant. Are you really going to throw your grandchild onto the street? The words hit me like a punch. Emily was pregnant, and I had to find out this way through blackmail. Is that true? I asked. Emily nodded through her tears. I wanted to tell you differently. I wanted it to be a special moment. Like the special surprise of throwing me out of my own home? I shot back even as my resolve wavered. But then I remembered my husband's words. Not to hurt but to protect and to teach. Emily needed to learn. And her child deserved better than the twisted values Brian lived by. Congratulations on the baby, Emily, I said evenly, fighting to keep my voice calm. But that doesn't erase what you did. Mom, please, she begged, her voice shaking. Think about your grandchild. Do you really want them to grow up without knowing you? Their grandma was right here all along, I answered softly. You two are the ones who decided to get rid of me. Brian tried another angle. Mrs. Linda, if you really have all this money, why not help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family. I looked at him with the contempt he deserved. A united family? Like when you plotted to have me declared incompetent. Like when you turned my daughter against me. I never. Quiet, Brian. My voice cracked like a whip, stronger than I thought possible. I've heard enough of your lies. The movers were gone now, leaving the three of us in thick silence. Emily cried quietly. Brian paced like a caged animal. And I felt calm, maybe for the first time in months. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Until then, I don't want to see you here unless it's a true emergency. And after that? Emily whispered, broken. After that, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and family. Brian snapped. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation. I laughed bitterly. Like when you tried to manipulate me with fake accusations about my mind. Like when you used my daughter's love to blackmail me. The difference is, I actually have the power I'm using. Emily stood up slowly. Is there anything we can do to change your mind? Yes, I said without hesitation. But I doubt Brian's willing to do it. What is it? She asked, desperate. I want a real apology. I want you both to admit you treated me like trash. And I want Brian to admit this was all his idea. Brian's face turned scarlet. I'll never humiliate myself in front of you. Then start packing, I said coldly. Emily turned to him, pleading. Brian, please. He's my mother. Your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, he shouted. I'm not bowing down to this manipulative old woman. The insult stung like a slap. Emily's mouth fell open, her eyes wide. Manipulative old woman, I repeated softly. Interesting. So that's what you really think of me, Brian? No, Emily whispered, but he had already lost control. Yes. Brian roared. That's exactly what I think. A bitter old lady who can't stand to see her daughter happy. That's why she invented this whole fairy tale about money. Made up? I asked quietly. I walked to the desk and pulled out more papers. Did I also invent these bank statements? These property deeds? These stock certificates? One by one, I laid them across the dining table until it was buried under proof. Emily stepped closer, trembling as she examined the documents. Oh my God, it's real. It's all real. Very real, I confirmed. And now you understand why your husband is so desperate to call me a liar. Brian sneered. Dawn, you can't seriously believe she hid all this for years. She's lying. No. Emily suddenly shouted, startling us both. Stop it, Brian. Just stop. She turned to me, tears pouring down her face. Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I stole your jewelry, your dignity, your memories. And I only did it because he convinced me you were a burden. Emily, don't listen to her. Brian barked, but she ignored him. He poisoned my mind with lies about your health, about how dangerous it was for you to live alone. He made me feel guilty for leaving you when all you wanted was your home. Emily, be quiet. Brian snapped. But it was too late. Don't you ever tell me to be quiet again, she screamed at him. I'm done with your manipulations. Done with you using me to hurt my mother. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in years, Emily had stood up for something true instead of blindly following her husband's commands. Brian turned on her with a coldness that made my stomach drop. If you choose your mother over me, Emily, this marriage is done. She froze just for a second, processing his ultimatum. Then, to my astonishment, she lifted her chin, looked him dead in the eye and said, "Then it's over." Her voice was strong, one I'd never heard from her before. Brian looked stunned, like the ground had shifted under him. For years he'd controlled every choice, every word, every breath she took. And now, for the first time, she told him no. "You can't be serious," he stammered with a weak smile. "You're pregnant, Emily. You can't raise a child on your own." "I won't be alone," she said, turning toward me with eyes that for the first time in months held something like love. "I have my mother." But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. The humiliation, the nights spent crying, the feeling of losing my only daughter. None of that could vanish with a single moment of clarity. "Emily," I said softly, "I'm glad you finally opened your eyes. But that doesn't erase what happened." Her face fell. "Mom, please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'll do whatever it takes." Brian, sensing control slipping from his hands, suddenly dropped to his knees in front of me, his eyes wide with fake repentance. "Mrs. Linda, you're right. It was all me. I convinced Emily you couldn't care for yourself. I pressured her. Please forgive me." I looked down at him, feeling both satisfaction and disgust. To see him grovel after months of arrogance, it was almost pitiful. "Now you beg for forgiveness, Brian? Only after realizing I'm not the helpless old woman you thought I was." "I was wrong," he insisted, still putting on his show. "Let me make it up to you. We can still be a happy family." "A happy family?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "Like when you tried to have me declared incompetent. Like when you called me a manipulative old woman 5 minutes ago." He swallowed hard. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. "No," I said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were saying. That was the real you talking." I turned to Emily, who was watching, her face full of shame and pain. "And you? Months of treating me like I was nothing. Do you think one apology erases that?" "No," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I know I can't erase it. But I can try to make things right." "How?" I asked. She glanced at Brian still kneeling there, then back at me. "By leaving him," she said finally. "By walking away from the man who convinced me to betray the only person who ever loved me without conditions." Brian jumped up, furious. "You can't be serious. You're having my child." "I am having my child," Emily shot back, steady and proud. "And I don't want my baby growing up watching a father who manipulates and mistreats his own family." "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Brian threatened. "The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you," she snapped. His face twisted with rage. "This isn't over. I'll fight for custody. I'll prove you and your mother are both insane." "With what money?" I asked calmly. "Tomorrow morning I'll speak to your boss. Did you know I own enough shares in your company to influence hiring decisions?" The blood drained from his face. "You wouldn't dare. After everything you've done to me?" "Of course I would." "That's an abuse of power," he muttered. "Like when you abused Emily's trust to turn her against me. Like when you abused my love as a mother to blackmail me." He stormed to the door, then turned back, venom dripping from his voice. "This isn't the end. I'll destroy you both." "Go ahead," I replied coolly. "But do it somewhere else. You've got 1 hour to clear out of my building." 1 hour? You said 30 days. That was when Emily was with you. Now she's not, and you have no claim to stay on my property. He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. For the first time in months, it was just Emily and me. The silence between us was heavy, almost unbearable. "Mom," she whispered at last, her voice trembling. "Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at her, 30 years old, pregnant, broken by betrayal, finally seeing the truth. "I don't know, Emily," I said honestly. "You hurt me more than I can put into words." "I know," she whispered. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." "Starting with what?" I asked. She pulled a small bag from her purse, the one holding my mother's jewelry. "Starting with giving this back. And by asking if I can stay here tonight. I have nowhere else to go." I looked at the bag, then at my daughter, pregnant, alone, and humbled. My heart softened just a little. "One night," I said finally. "Tomorrow we'll talk about how you're going to earn my trust again." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll make this right." But I knew promises were easy. The test would come later. The next days were tense, almost strange. Emily stayed in her old room, untouched since her wedding day. During the day we moved around the house like polite strangers, speaking only when necessary, about breakfast, the weather, her morning sickness. But I watched. Every word, every gesture, every effort she made to regain my trust. Slowly, I began to see hope. She washed her dishes right away, kept her room spotless, even started helping with chores without being asked. On the third day, as I watered my violets by the window, she came over carrying a cup of tea. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked. I nodded without turning. I'd learned that silence sometimes spoke louder than words. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," she began, settling into the chair where Brian used to sit like he owned the place. "About everything that happened. About the things I did and said." I kept watering my plants, waiting. "I've realized, it wasn't just Brian who changed me. I let him change me. I chose to believe him instead of trusting my own heart," Emily admitted. I finally turned to face her. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, thinner than she should have been despite the pregnancy. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping. "And why do you think that happened?" I asked gently. She sighed deeply. "Because it was easier to blame you than to face the fact that I married the wrong man." That raw honesty caught me off guard. I had braced myself for excuses, for justifications, but not this. "When Brian complained that you came around too much, I knew he was being unfair. But it was easier to call you clingy than admit he was selfish. When he started pushing for a retirement community, I knew it was wrong. But he convinced me it was for your own good. And I wanted to believe him, because the truth was harder." "And what was the truth?" I asked, though I already knew. "That I married a man who didn't respect me, who didn't respect my family, and who was never going to change." In the days that followed, Emily shared things that chilled me to the bone. How Brian had slowly cut her off from her friends, telling her they were a bad influence. How he controlled every penny, claiming women didn't know how to handle money. How he pushed her to quit her job because, according to him, real wives stayed home. "And you never thought to tell me?" I asked one afternoon. "He said you wouldn't understand," she whispered. "That you were from another generation. He told me if I shared our problems, you'd just tell me to leave him. And he didn't want any interference." Each confession hurt worse than the last. My daughter had been trapped in silence while I thought she was happy. And by the time she tried to draw close to me again, he had already taught her to see me as the enemy. 2 weeks after Brian stormed out, Emily got a phone call that drained the color from her face. "It's the building manager," she stammered. "Brian's in the lobby. He says he has the right to come up because he's still my husband." "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "That I don't want to see him. But he won't leave. He's yelling that he'll call the cops. He's saying this is kidnapping." I stood with a calmness that even surprised me. "Tell the manager to wait. I'll talk to him." "Mom, he's furious. We don't know what he'll do." "Exactly," I said. "That's why I need to go down there." When I stepped into the lobby, I found Brian raging, shouting at the terrified manager. "That crazy old woman has my wife locked up. Call the police." "Good afternoon, Brian," I said evenly. He spun toward me, bloodshot eyes, the smell of liquor on his breath. "You give me back my wife right now." "Emily is exactly where she wants to be," I told him. "And if you don't leave my property this second, I'll be the one calling the police." "This isn't your property. You're lying." I pulled out my phone and dialed my attorney. "Victoria," I said when she answered, loud enough for him to hear, "this is Linda. I've got a man here refusing to leave my building. Could you confirm that I'm the legal owner?" "Of course, Mrs. Linda," her clear voice rang through the speaker. You are the sole owner of the property at. Brian went silent. The manager stared at him, embarrassment flooding his face as the truth became undeniable. Anything else you need clarified, Brian? I asked, slipping the phone back into my purse. This isn't over, he muttered, but the fight had gone out of him. You're right, I said calmly. Tomorrow I'll be speaking with your supervisor. And the day after that, with the bank that gave you your car loan. Money makes contacts, and I have plenty. He left without another word, but I knew it wasn't the end. Men like him don't surrender easily. 2 months later, the storm we'd been dreading arrived. The trial. Brian followed through on his threat, suing us for parental alienation and financial manipulation. He demanded full custody of the baby Emily carried. That morning, as I dressed in my best black suit, Emily came into my room, her eyes wet with fear. Mom, I'm scared. What if the judge believes him? What if I lose my baby? I hugged her tightly, the first time in months. That's not going to happen. We have the truth. That's stronger than anything he's got. At the courthouse, Brian was already there with a lawyer who clearly cost him more than he could afford. He glared at me with that same old hatred. But this time I wasn't afraid. I had something he'd never have. The calm of a woman who knows she's right. Emily and I sat down together. She wore a purple dress that showed her 5-month pregnancy. I wore the earrings my husband had given me for our anniversary. We were ready. Brian's lawyer opened by painting me as a vengeful woman who used her wealth to tear apart a marriage. He called me manipulative, controlling, toxic. When our turn came, my lawyer Victoria stood gracefully and presented the truth. Text messages where Brian insulted Emily. Recordings where he threatened to leave her if she didn't push me out of my own home. Neighbors testifying to his shouting and cruelty. And then came the moment that shifted everything. The judge looked up at me and froze. Mrs. Linda Williams? He asked, disbelief in his voice. Yes, Your Honor, I answered, confused by his reaction. He took off his glasses and studied me. Did you work at the family court 30 years ago? My heart stopped. Yes. I was a secretary for Judge Miller. He smiled faintly. You helped me when I was just an intern. You showed me how to file cases. You even brought me coffee late at night. You treated me kindly when everyone else ignored me. The courtroom went still. Emily stared at me, stunned. Brian turned pale. My name is Judge David Morales, he continued. Do you remember me? And suddenly, beneath the gray hair and the robe of authority, I saw the shy young man I had once defended when others mocked him. The boy I had encouraged when he doubted himself. David, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. Of course I remember you. For a brief moment he smiled like that young man again, searching for approval. I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Linda. You once told me I'd be a great judge someday, even when I didn't believe it myself, Judge Morales said. Brian and his lawyer exchanged panicked glances. They already knew they had lost. Your Honor, Brian's lawyer stammered, this has to be a conflict of interest. There's no conflict, Judge Morales replied firmly. There is only justice. And after reviewing the evidence, it's clear that Mr. Brian Foster has been the sole manipulator in this case. The verdict was swift and decisive. Brian lost every parental right to the baby. He was barred from coming near Emily or me, and ordered to pay both court costs and damages for emotional harm. When we stepped outside the courthouse, Emily hugged me the way she hadn't since she was a little girl. Mom, how is it possible the judge knew you? Life moves in circles, honey, I told her softly. Kindness always finds its way back to you when you least expect it. 6 months later, when my granddaughter Serenity was born, I finally understood. It had all been worth it. Emily had come back to herself, becoming the tender, devoted mother I always knew she could be. One afternoon, as we rocked Serenity in the garden, Emily asked the question I'd been waiting for. Mom, have you really forgiven me? I looked at her, the woman who had grown so much in such a short time, who had rediscovered what really matters. I forgive you, Emily, I said at last. But more importantly, you've learned to forgive yourself. That night, as I poured tea into my chipped old mug, I thought of my husband and his letter. I had used the power he left me exactly as he'd hoped, not to hurt but to protect and to teach. Emily had learned that real love is rooted in respect, not control. And I had learned that it's never too late to stand tall for your dignity. Looking out the window at the garden where Serenity played, I smiled. Some battles are worth fighting. Some victories taste even sweeter when they take years to win. In the end, I hadn't needed to scream to be heard. I only had to remember who I was, and defend it with the calm certainty of someone standing on the right side of history. 5 years later, my life was unrecognizable. Little Serenity, now 4, darted through the garden chasing butterflies, her lively eyes shining just like her mother's, her stubborn streak all mine. Emily and I were in the kitchen preparing Sunday lunch, when Serenity ran up with a yellow flower clutched in her hand. "Grandma Linda, look what I found," she shouted. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, kissing her cheek. "Let's put it with the others in the vase." Emily smiled at me from the kitchen. Over the years she had blossomed, back in school, now working as an accountant at a small but thriving firm, and best of all, she'd regained that carefree laugh I remembered from her childhood. "Mom, a letter came for you," she said, handing me an elegant envelope. It was from the foundation I'd started 2 years earlier, Home and Dignity, a safe refuge for older women abandoned or mistreated by their families. What began as my way of making meaning from my own pain had grown into something much bigger. "They're inviting us to the opening of the third house," I said, my chest swelling with pride. 15 more women will have a place to rebuild their lives. In just a few years we've already helped more than 50. Each woman's story was different. Some cast aside by ungrateful children, some left utterly alone. But all had been stripped of their dignity. And all had found new strength inside our walls. The doorbell rang, breaking my thoughts. Emily opened it and returned with a knowing smile. "Mom, you've got visitors." Standing there was retired Judge David Morales, his hair now silver, his wife Elena at his side. "Mrs. Linda." He greeted me with the same warm smile I remembered from his youth. "I want you to meet my wife." "It's an honor," Elena said, taking my hands. "David has told me so much about you. He says you shaped his career." "He exaggerates," I replied, though my throat tightened with emotion. "Not at all," David insisted. "That's why we came. The Retired Judges Association is giving you an award for your work with the foundation." "That's not necessary," I began. "Yes, it is," he cut in gently. "Your story made many of us reflect on what real justice means. Not the kind written in laws, but the kind lived in truth." After they left, Emily and I sat on the porch while Serenity played with her dolls. The garden was in full bloom. I'd hired a gardener, but the African violets, my husband's favorites, I still cared for myself. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Emily asked suddenly. "What's that?" "That you never let bitterness win. After everything I did, after all the hurt, you didn't let it harden your heart." "Of course I felt bitter," I admitted. "There were nights I drowned in resentment. But your father taught me something precious in his letter." "What did he teach you?" "That real power doesn't come from revenge. It comes from turning pain into something good, for others." Emily nodded. She understood, she'd lived it. Now she volunteered at the foundation, guiding younger women through the same traps she had once fallen into. "Did you ever find out what happened to Brian?" she asked. "Victoria told me he moved to another city. Apparently he remarried." I paused. "I hope he learned something, but it's no longer my concern." "You're not curious at all?" "No," I said honestly. "Some people only come into your life to teach you lessons. Once you've learned, you can let them go." Just then Serenity bounded up, cheeks flushed from play. "Grandma, will you tell me the story of the brave grandma?" It was her favorite, my softened version of the past. In her story, a grandma discovered magical powers and used them to protect her family from a great dragon. "Again," I teased, scooping her onto my lap. "Yes, and don't forget the part where the good judge helps her." As I told the tale for the 100th time, I marveled at how strange destiny is. I had to lose everything to discover what I truly had. I had to hit rock bottom to uncover my real strength. "And happily ever after?" Serenity asked, her eyes wide. "Happily ever after," I whispered. "The brave grandma found her happy ending." "You found your happy ending, Grandma," Serenity said. I looked around, Emily setting the table, the garden blooming, my granddaughter safe in my arms, and I knew she was right. And the letter from the foundation promised that even more women would be helped in the months to come. "Yes, my love," I told Emily. I did. That night, after tucking Serenity into bed, I sat down in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the weekly letters that always seemed to arrive. One was from a 75-year-old woman thanking me for giving her the courage to stand up to her abusive son. Another, from a 60-year-old grandmother, told me she had won back her home after her own grandchildren tried to swindle her. Each letter was proof that what I had gone through had been transformed into something greater than my own suffering. Emily came to sit beside me, holding her own cup of tea. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" "About your father," I admitted softly. "How proud he would be of what we've built." "I'm sure he's watching us," she whispered. "And about you," I added, squeezing her hand. "How proud I am of the woman you've become." "I learned from the best," she said, her voice tender as she reached for me. We sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in the stillness of the evening. The distant hum of the city drifted in, but in our garden there was only peace. "I love you, Mom," Emily whispered. "I love you too, honey," I replied. "I've always loved you, even in the darkest moments." And it was true. A mother's love stretches beyond hurt, beyond betrayal, beyond disappointment. Stronger than pride, deeper than resentment, more powerful than any fortune. That night I slept peacefully, no nightmares, no worries. I had found something more valuable than all the wealth in the world. The peace of knowing I had used my second chance wisely. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you feel like it, share your story in the comments.